Welcome to another episode of the Swarm Chatter Podcast. I'm Nachum Weinstein. This episode is dedicated by Shoshana and Yosef Kassorla in honor of Morton and Anette Eleff, whose lifelong commitment to building a family rooted in Torah and mitzvahs in Portland, Oregon continues to inspire generations. Their example of faith, warmth, and community devotion stands as a testament to what it means to live a life of purpose and Jewish values. This episode is also dedicated in honor of Rabbi Dr. Zev Eleff, whose pioneering scholarship on American Jewish history has deepened and enriched their understanding of the American Jewish perspective. His work preserves our collective memory and helps illuminate the spirit and story of Jews in America. This podcast episode is sponsored by the Touro Graduate School of Jewish Studies, a leading academic program in Jewish studies that equips students with the tools to search out their own unique path into the study of Jewish history and thought. Based in New York City, the Touro Graduate School of Jewish Studies provides a supportive environment and personal attention from world-class faculty, seminar-style courses, one-on-one mentorship opportunities, and career advancement guidance. Students can study in person or complete the program online from anywhere in the world. Offerings include a Master of Arts degree in Jewish Studies with concentrations in Jewish history and Jewish education, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Jewish history, literature, and thought. Those who wish to audit specific classes of interest are welcome to do so as well. For more information on admission to the Touro Graduate School of Jewish Studies, including generous scholarships, please visit gsjs.touro.edu. Call 212-463-0400, extension 55580, or email karen.rubin@touro.edu, and you can find all that information and link in the show notes below. And finally, this episode is also sponsored by koshercloth.com. One thing I appreciate about koshercloth.com is how easy they make buying stam. Whether you're looking for a tefillin, mezuzahs, a megillah, or even a sefer Torah, they take the time to explain the options, answer your questions, and help you find what's right for your needs and budget. To learn more, visit koshercloth.com, that's KOSHERKLAF.com, or call or WhatsApp 516-737-5436. They have pickup options in New York and New Jersey, as well as fast shipping across the country. You can find a link and more information in the show notes below. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me, sfarmchatter@gmail.com, or check out the information in the show notes. You can also find a link to the Sfarm Chatter WhatsApp community and WhatsApp status, where I post new books, new Sfarm, book deals, and more. And with that, enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Swarm Chatter Podcast, another episode here on the series about early American rabbinate. And in this episode, I'm going to be joined once again by Dr. Zev Eleff, who's the president of Gratz College, and we will be discussing, this time, Rabbi Abraham Rice, or Reese, but it's spelled Rice, R-I-C-E, but we will talk about a pronunciation. So thank you, Zev, for joining me once again.
Thanks for having me, Nafi. This is, I don't know what credential I have, being an American Jewish historian, being the president of a Jewish college, or being a Baltimorean, or Baltimorean, where, of course, Rabbi Abraham Rice was the first ordained rabbi who arrived in the United States in 1840, and he landed in Baltimore.
Yeah, let's talk about him. And let's start with his bio, because there is some biography before he even comes to the United States. So as you mentioned, the first ordained rabbi. I mean, on this series, I've talked about the Reverend Gershom Seixas and Isaac Leeser and others that were here around the time, but they were not rabbis. They were not ordained rabbis. They didn't have smicha. And so Rabbi Rice was. What's his background, where he was born, his family, where he studied, where he learned in yeshiva, and so on?
All great. So he's born in Gagsheim, which is near Würzburg, which is a rabbinic center. He's born in the year 1800, and he is studying in the most elite yeshivas in Central Europe. He studies in Fürth under Rabbi Wolf Hamburger. I can't beat that. And if you could, it's because in Würzburg you have the yeshiva of Rabbi Avraham Bing, which he studied there after. So he receives official smicha from Rabbi Avraham Bing. The problem is that Rabbi Rice can't get a job, because in Bavaria and in many places in this German region, one needs to have the equivalent of a college degree in order to obtain a rabbinic position. Because, of course, you think about it in America, who makes somebody into a rabbi? The congregation. Young Israel this, a good of this. They hire somebody, and that's who decides. This person is going to be the rabbi of the community. Well, think about that. Rabbi of the community. It's a voluntary idea. I join into the community. I don't want to get too abstract here. In Europe, what you have are Stadtrav, right? You have the idea of a state-sponsored rabbinic position. We have separation of church and state in the United States. Not so throughout Europe. So if it's going to be a state-sponsored position, the state gets to decide the credentials that somebody needs to have. Otherwise, they're going to gatekeep him out of a job. So Rabbi Harold Sharpman, who writes the biography, a huge tome, The First Rabbi, and it's an important book. Sharpman wrote his dissertation, not clear if he completed it or not, at Yeshiva University on 19th century rabbinic responsa. I remember that as I was leaving New York for Boston, fearing that I would not have access to this tome, this dissertation, which eventually became essentially the biography of Rice, although it's very, very different, but you could see how it germinates one to the other. I remember spending, I think, 5 hours in the Yeshiva University Gottesman library, borrowing however many printer accounts I could to photocopy, and then went to Staples. And I still have these reams. I use them. A great collector of material. He claims, and there's really no evidence that I've seen to back it up, is that Rice was brought to America by no less than Rabbi Solomon Herschel, who was the unofficial chief rabbi of England. When he dies, British Jews decide they're going to formalize a chief rabbin, and they hire Nathan Adler. But Rabbi Solomon Herschel and his Beit Din, his Beis Din in London, they see themselves as having oversight. They were, King George didn't give them the memo, having oversight over American Jews as well. So Sharpman claims that it was Rabbi Herschel who sent Rabbi Rice to the United States to whip him into shape. I haven't seen that evidence. What we do know is that Rabbi Rice was essentially locked out of a position because he didn't have a college degree. We also know, unfortunately, he lost a child a few months before he travels over the Sir Isaac Newton, I believe, that's the name of the ship that he sailed over the Atlantic. In any case, he comes to the United States, and he announces that he is the champion of traditional Judaism, and he is going, if he wasn't sent for this reason, he certainly announces that is going to be his purpose in the United States when he lands in 1840.
Yeah, and so Rice, there's a couple things to mention there to pick up on what you just said. First of all, important to mention that's why they were able to gatekeep, because this was a state-sponsored position as opposed to America, where you're like, wait, why can't I just hire whoever I want as a rav of my little shul? Now, you mentioned Sharpman's volume by Pangloss Press. I don't know, it's a made-up press that they put, massive volume. I think you can still find it used. It's about 750 pages. There's a ton of images, black and white, but a ton of pictures and images in there, and there's a ton of stuff. It actually is much broader. I'm reading the book. I learned a lot. It's also, it's like very broad. Like an editor today would take this and like slim down 300, take out 300 some page from here that don't belong in this book. But obviously, it's a fascinating read. So you say he moves to America, and by the way, just to follow up, is his family name, or at least originally, Rice, or is it Reese?
Probably Reese. When he comes to America, he is certainly known as Rice. And that's hardly uncommon for the slight name changes from Europe to the United States.
What, you mentioned Herschel. Herschel is the grandson of the Chacham Tzvi. His father's Herschel Levin in Berlin, and is the Rav in Berlin, and so on. Why do we know, however, really, why Rice comes to the United States? And how do we know, we mentioned that this is known that he's the first ordained rabbi. How do we know that he is the first ordained rabbi to come to the United States?
Well, we simply just not have any evidence there was an ordained rabbi who said. Now, Chacham Karagal came to Newport for a short amount of time, but he didn't really stay. He was fundraising. We simply just not have any evidence that an ordained rabbi, you're part of the series and well-deserved, is Gershom Mendesatius, was certainly a highly trained Ben Torah and a highly functioning synagogue leader. He wasn't ordained in any way, shape, or form. Rice, we're pretty certain, is the first. Now, he doesn't stay in the rabbinate for too long. We'll talk about that. But he is the first long-standing ordained rabbi in the United States. That's an amazing thing. When you think about it, is that first Jews arrived in the United States in 1654, nearly 200 years before an ordained rabbi settles in the United States.
So Rice moves here in 1840, and he goes to New York, which is like then, like now. New York is still the big place. He goes to New York. Let's talk about at least the Jewish community. What is I know this has come up elsewhere on the series, but I think it's important to put in context here. What is the Jewish community like at the time of Rice's arrival in the United States?
So in 1840, there are probably somewhere between 100 and 150,000 Jews in the United States. The largest community by far is New York. Charleston was. The embargoes and the War of 1812 really sunk the Charleston Jewish community. Eventually, in due time, with the gold rush, San Francisco and Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, but it hews very close to the East Coast at this time. Philadelphia is a longstanding Jewish community. Baltimore, the whole city of Baltimore, is growing at this time. It's really in the 19th century that Baltimore grows, and so that explains why Rice finds himself there. New York is the hub, and everything is a small spoke at this point.
One more history question, although he's first in New York, and we're going to get to as soon as move to Baltimore. As a native Baltimorean, you can talk about this. What was the community like in Baltimore at the time? I know he doesn't move immediately to Baltimore, but he's going to end up, that's where he spends most of his life in America there. What's
Baltimore is a very Catholic community. That's important. Catholics respect their religious leaders. So he's known, and the Baltimore Sun calls him the Grand Rabbi or the Chief Rabbi, because that's what they know. They know popes and cardinals. They know bishops. So rabbinic authority lends itself to Baltimore. And if you think about it, Baltimore has really flourished rabbinically. You can't really think of too many controversies. This is not the podcast for rabbinic controversies. But Baltimore really has respected its rabbanim over the course of history. And I think that's due in large part to a general ethos of a respect for religious authority. It's a port town. It becomes incredibly important with the B&O Railroad. With rail, all of a sudden, Baltimore becomes a throughway, a way station to Ohio and to the West. And so from people who are working in business and importing and exporting, Baltimore, it becomes a very important port city. And the Jewish community, because of its network, they facilitate a hub. First in Lloyd Street, which Rice becomes the rabbi. And then, of course, you have Reform Judaism, it really starts to flourish in Baltimore.
And it's interesting that Baltimore is Catholic, because most of America is Protestant, still is Protestant, not Catholic.
And the Calverts and the Baltimores, and these were, right.
Yeah, and also another thing that you mentioned, but by the way, to mention the B&O Railroad, you can still go to the museum there in Baltimore. It's great. I went there. It's a great little spot. You can see some Baltimore American history. Now, Rice, as you mentioned, he became known as like the chief rabbi. That's like what Baltimore they're calling him. So there was a campaign, though, to make him the chief rabbi of the United States. Now, this is a topic that I think is like related to this whole series here, where there ends up with no chief rabbi, and this will come up later at the end of the series, Rabbi Dr. Yosef in New York. But there is some sort of campaign to some degree to make him the chief rabbi of the United States.
So it's very clear that along the Sir Isaac Newton, Rabbi Rice must have made room for his Sfarim. It's very hard to know. Historians, very hard to know what was in people's library. But we know from his writing in the Occident, which was a newspaper that came out of Philadelphia with Isaac Leeser beginning in 1843, he's quoting chapter and verse from Gemaras and Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Rice was smart. There's no way he had an eidetic memory of that sort. He wasn't Rav Ovadia. And so he must have had Sfarim with him. And there was a campaign locally and in Philadelphia. Philadelphia and Baltimore had a connection. They still have a connection. Ad Hayom. And there is a campaign. Isaac Leeser gets on the bandwagon because that's how Jews at the time made sense. And even think about the newspaper that I just referenced, the Occident, which is a fancy word for the West, which positioned itself in juxtaposition of Der Orient, a newspaper out of Germany, of the East. American Jews were immigrant Jews. When they thought about the rabbinate, they thought about the chief rabbinate. They thought about Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. They thought about Rabbi Nathan Adler. They would think of Stadtrabbiner like Rabbi Kiva Eger and Chacham Sofer was on their mind in Presburg. That's how they understood. What they didn't understand is that there was ample room for pushback. Because, of course, this is not a state-sponsored religion. That's not what happens. And so it didn't really go very far. But Rabbi Rice was very quickly understood as the most legitimate Talmud Chacham who had ever really set foot on a long-term basis in the New World. Certainly in the United States.
One can even argue that even today, I mean, you still see that not everyone, but many Jews are still gravitating towards, they want to have a gadol hador, so to speak. They're always looking for, that's how they make sense of things. Always a chief rabbi, there's someone in charge.
We like the thing. Yeah, now you're getting me on a book on the idea of greatness. We love to talk about the goat. We love to talk, because it makes sense. We don't want, this is the success that people who have an expertise in this will point to Costco or Trader Joe's. I guess on this podcast we can say Lahavdil, whatever. That the genius of Costco is you only get to choose one or two different types of marinara sauces. Same thing with Trader Joe's. We don't like choices. It's a tyranny. We like to know. We like to have a narrowed sense of things. And authority provides certain clarity of direction. I was going to say Rice, we mentioned Baltimore, as there's somebody else who's destined for Baltimore along the ride on the Sir Isaac Newton, and that's William Rayner. William Rayner becomes a very important reform leader in Baltimore. He is one of the founders of Sinai, of the Sinai Verein, this society that eventually becomes a very important reform congregation in Baltimore. He actually watches as Rabbi Rice docks off of the boat, delivers a drasha on the what we now know called the Lower East Side, announcing he's here to support and champion traditional Judaism. He doesn't use the term orthodoxy. That's not a term that people use. You don't have orthodox till you have heterodox. So he didn't refer to it that way. We also know, according to Rayner, that Rabbi Rice was told there may be a position available to him in Newport, Rhode Island. It's the Touro Synagogue. Poor Rabbi Rice, he shows up in Rhode Island. There isn't a minyan. He sees the building, but it wasn't so. So he turns back to New York. He eventually gets the position in Baltimore. And it's a very happy thing that he and his young family can move to Baltimore. It happens very, very quickly in the first couple months. He's there by the Yom Noraim.
Yeah, so he's in Baltimore quickly. Let's talk about his time in Baltimore, at least initially, while he's in the rabbinate. Because you already gave away that spoiler. So he's in the rabbinate, he goes to Baltimore. What's that like in the beginning, his shul, his career in the rabbinate of Baltimore?
So he's at Lloyd Street Synagogue, which is this very important congregation, eventually becomes a center of reform, but not in Rice's time. He's not paid very well. We know this because he appealed to the Philadelphia Jews to help basically give tzedakah. He didn't have any money. So they subvented his salary. So we know that the Baltimore Jews didn't pay him so much. We know that in personal letters back to Europe, back to some of his teachers, he referred to the people around him as heretics and apostates, apikorsim. I have a quote for you. So Rice forecasted that others would arrive in the United States who, and I quote, who could not tell their right from their left. So, Yasori Aminu Small playing a different play on words there. I dwell in complete isolation, lamented Rabbi Rice, without a teacher or a companion in this land whose atmosphere is not conducive to wisdom. Unfortunately, we have this as a translation, I believe, of a letter at the Jewish Theological Seminary. We don't have the original German or Hebrew, however it was written by Rabbi Rice. So he's not happy on a local level. He thinks he's surrounded by apikorsim and amaratza. That's probably the language that he actually used.
But this was going on. This was going on in America at the time, right? It's apikorsim and amaratza. This is what the story. So, how does he?
Yeah, but that's not really fair because I mean you're right, but there's apikorsim and there's amaratzis going on every little shtetl in every little area. The idea that everybody was a barachi is obviously not so. But he's just simply unhappy. He does gain. My sense is that he gains a certain level of satisfaction by being in a more national conversation, whether that's about Gittin in Cleveland, and later on in the 1850s. He's involved in a very curious case about etrogim from the Caribbean, in which they have a whitish, they're not yellow, they're not like Corfu or Petach Tikva Etrogim. And so there are questions whether or not they're grafted or not, whether it's kilayim. And he comes out, he's matir them. And so not everybody agrees with him. And you get the sense, he writes a tshuva. Now, the Occident I mentioned is usually an English newspaper, but for Rabbi Rice, who was not comfortable writing in English, they found it's an awkward looking font, but they use a Hebrew font. It's a tshuva. That's how you know he had svarim. And so this back and forth about the Caribbean etrogim, you get the sense that Rabbi Rice through the machlokas, he gained a certain enjoyment, that he is actually serving a purpose. But as a congregational rabbi, he had no mazel.
So how did he insert himself onto the national stage? Is this just slowly he started writing in Leser's Occident, and how did he do that?
He writes. Unfortunately, although we have some of Leser's letters, we don't have all of the personal ones. He was solicited to write very often, and sometimes he would weigh in. When you can almost get a certain intuition when you're looking through newspapers. These are all now, I think, the NLI, the National Library of Israel, has scanned, I think, all of the Occident, so anybody can find them. When I was looking through, sure, other people had cited them before, but not such an old person. But I remember going through the Occident, page by page. You get the feeling that when you see a halachic issue in the Occident, that Rabbi Rice next month is going to respond. And often he did.
As one can imagine, one of the big things that he was involved with was reform. And he was fighting with Gustav Poznansky, and he was busy with all the different things that were going on. Second Day Yom Tov and Oregon and Shul, and we'll get to Lilienthal and Wise, and everything. So, I mean, if you want to just talk about it, he gets involved, and he's one of the big Loich Meha reform in this country.
That's no question. So when Gustavus Poznansky in Charleston is getting rid of the second day of Yom Tov, and they're installing an organ, which becomes a court case in Charleston, Rabbi Rice offers a deposition. He comes out against it, obviously, as you can imagine. That's while he's in the rabbinate. That's the mid-1840s. After he leaves the rabbinate, I believe in 1849, he opens up a dry goods store. No harm in that. He's still playing an active role. He basically says, you know what? I'm a Talmud Chacham at large. I don't actually need Lloyd Street to pay me for my mortgage. I can do it another way and still be the resident national Talmud Chacham. And so that's what he does. And so issues about Gittin, certainly issues about reform in New York, in the Cleveland Conference in 1856, in which Isaac Mayer Wise, he's moved now from Albany to Cincinnati, and he issues a set of planks about the divinity of the Bible and the interpretation of the Bible that is the Talmud, and it's not quite siyata d'shmaya enough for Rabbi Rice's liking, so he issues a statement decrying the Cleveland Conference and everybody who participated. He is involved in a strange word. At the time it was a synod, which is just basically a Sanhedrin. Leeser wants to establish some sort of rabbinic court on the national scene, and Rice is involved there. He lacks the facility of English to play too much of a role. You get the sense that he became more acquainted with English later on. He dies very young. Born 1800, dies in 1862. He returns to the rabbinate in the last 3 or 4 years of his lifetime. At the end of his life, I would like to imagine that Rabbi Rice was content, that he found a space to defend his Judaism. It wasn't locally in Baltimore per se, but he certainly garnered the respect, whether that was from Bernard Ilway, who was in Baltimore for a time and respected him very much, and I think there's correspondence between the two of them. He was the elder statesman. He was Lamashal. He was the Rav Shimon Shkop that all of the Talmidim were looking toward. Do I think that Rabbi Rice, Yiftach B'dar Kishmol B'dar? Rabbi Rice was not Rav Shimon. It doesn't have the area. Don't make any mistake about that. But they looked at him the way that a certain generation of pre-war rabbinate in Europe looked to Rav Shimon Shkop as the man. I think that's fair to say about Rice.
He had the chashivas, he had the cachet. He was the rabbi. He was the big figure. And as you say, and you can read a lot of this in the Scharfman book, where he's fighting against Lilienthal. He's fighting against Wise. He's issues a chirim against Wise. He defends chalitza extensively when Wise says, chalitza, whatever. He defends it. He defends coming a Mashiach. We talk about this as a Poznansky and Wise issue. He fights against Einhorn. We didn't talk about the other radical reformer in Baltimore. He fights, extensively against him. And perhaps we can return to some of this. I do want to just mention here. You mentioned a few times he left the rabbinate. What happened? This is someone that has smicha that comes. He's a rabbi. He's the only rabbi, and he leaves the rabbinate. What happens?
It's very machmir like the Rambam, and he thought you can't get a parnas for being a congregational rabbi. I don't know. He didn't read the Shulchan Aruch. He did. I think it was quite simple. Is that he saw an opportunity to earn a livelihood selling dry goods, opening up a convenience store, and he didn't need the tzaras in his life. And he could still command that position. Surrendering the pulpit was not the same thing as surrendering his status as a Talmid Chacham. He was able to claim one without having to keep the other.
Right, and that's important to point out for sure, that he was just resigning the pulpit, but he was still very involved in different communal national matters and writing and so on.
He was an accommodating person. He shortened, he got rid of Akdamos, for example, I believe, every week. He made certain, I don't want to say concessions, they weren't. He issued certain kulas to recast Orthodox Judaism in a more acceptable light for his congregation. He was not an arch defender of a certain guard. He did accommodate to some extent or another. In no way that, the Chasam Sofer would not have been upset with the rulings of Rabbi Abraham Rice. But he did see himself as trying to protect traditional Judaism. There's no question about it. But what got him more upset than a David Einhorn, who was the local radical reform leader in Baltimore, was Chilul Shabbos, was the fact that he could not keep his congregation from observing the Sabbath in the way that he felt they needed to. It was really his arch nemesis really wasn't reform. It was the modern industry in the 6-day work week in the United States. That's what got Rabbi Rice out of the rabbinate.
The realities of America, essentially.
Absolutely.
But as you say, he was a defender of religion in a religious sense. He was a fighter of reform, and he was quite important. And defender of religion, I mean, you could this extensive list in Scharfman's book. He was very busy with circumcision, so with Mila, with Kashrus, with Shechita, Mikvah, the Tshuva to the Gedulit Hara, I believe, Shabbos, as you just mentioned, synagogue, etiquette, Sonjul. He was busy with the Piyutim. As you say, that's what's always interesting. You see, like, this was one of the early fights against reform, but then you have Rabbanim like Rabbi Rice saying, they'll prune the Piyutim, let's take out some of them. They don't all, belong in them. And so, one interesting thing that I saw, that he was against Masonic rights and Mason, and there were Jews that were Freemasons.
Oh, without question.
This is not only a conspiracy theory.
Without question. Well, he definitely, because Freemasonry, and eventually they formed their own in B'nai B'rith in the 1840s. It became a religion in and of itself. It became cultic. They had its own ceremonies, their own ritual. Cornelia Wilhelm's written a very important book about B'nai B'rith, and its true sisters, the women's sorority group. Yeah, again, and that betokens exactly what we're talking about. Is that Rice saw the ills of American modernity as much more problematic than Jewish religious reform.
One thing that he, along with many leaders, and even as discussed in this series, leaders like Lilienthal and others, reform leaders, was busy with education, Jewish education. This is something that was important to him.
Yeah, although education in that moment was really in the province of women. Think about Rebecca Gratz, my professional obligation to mention Rebecca Gratz as often as I can. And her acolytes bring the Sunday school movement to Baltimore. So Rabbi Rice certainly supports that, but if you think about it, is that the Sunday school, and that's really, there's no such thing as a day school yeshiva in this moment. That also upset Rabbi Rice, is that it just didn't have the infrastructure that you would have in Europe. But certainly supported.
What about slavery? I know this is an issue that becomes an issue in Baltimore, hot button topic with David Einhorn. And Baltimore itself is in a funny geographic location when it comes to the Civil War.
It's an interesting question. I have to submit that Rabbi Rice is not usually in the collection of materials that we have, certainly, although I think it's misunderstood. Morris Raphael, he's not really defending slavery. He's upset by those who claim there's no such thing as slavery mentioned in the Bible. And he just takes out a Tanakh and says, no, there is slavery. His son is terribly wounded in Gettysburg, is Raphael's. So I think people misunderstand the speech that Raphael delivers. Rice doesn't speak out, probably because it's very hard to speak out in Baltimore one way or the other. It's on the Mason-Dixon line. It's officially a Southern city. Of course, Einhorn is a radical abolitionist, not just for the North, but an abolitionist. Even Lincoln didn't start off as an abolitionist, and he's kicked out. He's told to leave Baltimore and he moves to Philadelphia. Rice, I don't know if he says anything. I don't know. Are you aware of anything?
I'm not sure. That's why I wanted to ask.
I suspect it has more to do with you have to protect yourself if you're in Baltimore and you have an opinion about slavery than it does about Rabbi Rice having an opinion one way or the other.
Which we know with Einhorn, he gets almost killed. He has to escape.
Right, so he takes his chances, and he's even though he's essentially the founding rabbi, it's founded before he arrives of Sinai congregation. He's told to leave this. You put us on the map for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Also, by the way, I want to go back to the Piyutim. I mentioned the Piyutim. So there's a really nice quote that Sharfman quotes. The one thing about Sharfman's book, it doesn't really have sources. It doesn't tell you where he's getting things, and if it was written in Hebrew, and if it was written in English. He has one of those old style books where you're like, wait, where are the sources? Like, where's he? But okay, he has on page 230 and 231 where he talks about the sermon that he gave on Pesach, where Rice explains, as he calls it, a sensitive subject, taking out Piyutim. I know, the irony is, right, how many shuls recite Piyutim and things today? Maybe the Hasidim kept some of it, even though there's Ashkenaz, and then no one really says any of it. Maybe some Yakis, no one really says it anymore. So Rice says that he explains two different categories of Piyutim. He says the first one is those composed 1,000 years ago, when the Hebrew language flourished and almost everyone understood the sacred tongue. These were generally written in a light, simple style, and basically everyone understood it. Then he says that the other types of Piyutim, they were introduced into the festival prayer book and those of especially designated Sabbaths. Right? That these were an uncommon flowery tongue, which most people in our day no longer understand. So essentially he says, well, I'm getting rid of those. No one understands them. There's no point. And he says he's convinced that the composers of these Piyutim never intended they should be recited in times as these, when it is oftentimes difficult to count 10 people in an entire community who would even understand a portion of them. Then, as Sharfman relays, there was a pushback, and of course a blow up, and like, how could you do such a thing? So then he says, and he continued, and he doubled down. He was adamant that I didn't want to offend anyone, but I wanted to exclude something he said it was never part of davening. It was never meant to be. Nobody understands what's going on. He quotes Ibn Ezra and so on. So you can get kind of a sense of he really had his own opinions, and he wasn't, as you said, he wasn't just sticking to everything, status quo, so to speak. He definitely was changing up certain things to, I guess, improve the situation in shul and so on.
No question. Yeah, he's an important personality, and not just because he was the first. And absolutely somebody who trailblazed a certain path in American Jewish life.
What's his relationship like with Isaac Leeser? I think when you talk about all the figures from this period, Isaac Leeser is the titan, and everyone comes up. We mentioned already he's writing in the Occident. What's his relationship? And you can throw in there already the Cleveland Conference of 1855, where only Leeser attends, and everybody else backs says you don't meet with Wise, you don't meet with Russell. Yeah, Leeser's early, but Rice is adamantly opposed, and just in general, his relationship with Leeser.
Leeser is very often the person who brings Rice into national public conversation. Not that he uses Rice in any way. Leeser understands his own limitations, although I think he was very self-effacing and other people were too hard on him. Isaac Leeser knew how to learn. You could see from the level of translations that he had of various, certainly of the Bible and the Siddur, but also other rabbinic and medieval philosophical works. He knew what he was talking about. But he deferred to Rice. He was happy that Rice was there, that he had the Rosh Hashiva there as he could fight the good fight, and referred to Rabbi Rice when need be. That Baltimore and Philadelphia were so close to one was close to the other, I think helped things. They enjoyed a good relationship. Certainly, Leeser very often travels, particularly after he's let go at Mikveh Israel in 1850. And so he sees Rice more. And in the Cleveland Conference, which we referred to now a few times, he really relies on Rice, saying, this is heretical, right? And Rice, writes back, yes, it is. It's all right. Absolutely. That's kfira. How do I know? Rabbi Rice says so.
So he's like his hechsher. He's the Rav that he goes to for anything that he needs.
Right.
But when it comes to the Cleveland Conference, Lisa goes ahead with it, and Rice says, no, don't do this.
Right. Well, Rice wasn't a congregational rabbi at the time, so it wouldn't have been intuitive that he'd be invited or go in the first place. Right. At that point, he's running a store. Now he's a public personality, I understand. But the Cleveland Conference is really meant as for congregational rabbinic or with an asterisk leaders. Leeser does go. He regrets it, obviously. And Rice is writing in the Occident, explaining just what is so problematic. Leeser is emboldened. I think that's the right word. He's emboldened by Rabbi Rice's position in the aftermath of the Cleveland Conference.
Now, I want to also mention his resignation. You mentioned his resignation, and I thought it really struck me with Sharfman. Again, I don't know where it's coming from exactly because he doesn't source it, but just to read the two things that he quotes Rice, and I thought it was fascinating. So he talks about different sermons, and Rice says, I am aware that my sermons have caused me much trouble and grief. My outspokenness has oft times disturbed my peace and serenity. Yet an inner voice, which you may call conscience, speaks to me and says, be yourself, act according to the obligations of your calling. My conscience further says to me, it is your rabbinic responsibility, your professional obligation to teach the right path of our religion, regardless of the consequences to yourself. One must be prepared to sacrifice comfort and tranquility and even abandon one's occupation if need be in the interest of truth. One should not be afraid to speak openly against the wealthy and influential, the powerful, regardless of the consequences. Then he continues, one who stands at the head of his people and strives to spread the word of God among them must not become discouraged when his words are not accepted as they should be. As long as we live on this earth, we can but expect that the good and true has its struggles and its destiny, as does everything else in this world. But with this difference, that goodness and truth is eventually accepted even by its opponents. I think to me that was a very strong and striking quote, and a man of deep conviction. And I think it really shows, at least me, who Rabbi Rice really was.
Also shows how underpaid he was.
For sure. But all the rabbis were underpaid.
Right. Until Raphael, really. And then Wise. Yeah. You get a sense that he wasn't going to buckle under lay pressure. And you know what? I don't need this in my life. And so he leaves. One of the challenges with Sharfman and others is that what you just read, there's no way that Rabbi Rice used tranquility in writing. So it'd be, the rabbi in me wants to, and the scholar wants to know exactly what he said, because that's the language. One of the challenges as a historian, we don't often have Rabbi Rice's language in some of these moments. We have it for the published material in the Occident, sure, but it's mostly halachic items. We have in his combative posturing against the Cleveland Conference. But some of those other things, especially in Baltimore, I would have liked to have seen the original.
For sure, 100%. And Sharfman doesn't even tell where he's coming from. That's even worse. Mm-hmm. Now, he ends up as a merchant, as you mentioned, but he does end up with a house shul. Well, shul in his house.
Right. So his followers come with, I wouldn't care. That wasn't certainly a pulpit position. And in those days, if you had access to a Sefer Torah, even like it is today, think about COVID, you could, he furnished a place for his devotees. Yeah.
A lot that he was involved with. You can look through the accident. It is all scanned online now regarding Rice. But do we have any systematic writings, or it's just scattered all over?
One imagines, I think Sharfman died young. It's very sad. One would have liked to have had a collection of his writings. I don't know if there's more beyond 3 or 4 episodes that we already spoke about in the Occident. We don't have much in terms of archival materials. There's a small collection at the Jewish Theological Seminary. American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati has a little bit. We don't have more. I fear that there's really not new material that's come out to make us better understand the life and times of Rabbi Abraham Rice.
Yeah, I think Scharfman, I'm trying to find it here. I was looking at the book, but I don't see it offhand. I think he mentioned somewhere like this is like volume 1 and volume 2 is going to be like collected writings of Rice. I guess he never got to that. Like he was supposed to do that. I claimed he wanted to.
Yeah, well, one wishes.
Right. We don't really have it. So you mentioned already, okay, you said that Rabbi Rice dies in 1862. Anything to talk about around the time of his death or his death and right after?
Only that it's a transitional point. Morris Raphael dies in 1868. Leeser dies around then as well. And so that period in the 1860s, that vanguard of the Orthodox rabbinate, in some ways, Raphael is starker than Rice in some of his positions. Much more of a modern-looking figure. It's not so in how they position themselves. Rabbi Rice is the first of a number of stalwart rabbinic or religious leaders who champion orthodoxy, who die in the pivotal 1860s. And so out of the Civil War, orthodoxy really languishes. It really isn't until the 1880s that a stronger Orthodox rabbinate starts to emerge in the United States.
Yeah, much later on, as you said. And Rabbi Raphael, it's funny because he is university trained. He's somewhat of a maskil in the sense, he quotes the maskilim, and he's quite an interesting figure. But on the other hand, he is staunchly, orthodox. Let's use that word in some of his opinions.
For example, in the Cleveland Conference, he would have held that every letter of Amar Abaye, every word of Shas was given to Moses at Sinai. I don't think he was almost Hirschian in his view like that. Rice would not have, and he wasn't as cavalier as Morris Raphael. And maybe that was the interesting thing about it, is one came from more of a British high order atmosphere, originally from Stockholm, was Raphael. Rice from a much more German environment. And as you point out, Raphael having a college degree. Rice, if he had a college degree, would never have set foot in Baltimore. Probably would have stayed in Europe forever. A really interesting personality.
Yeah, one of those ironies. What's Rabbi Rice's legacy?
Rabbi Rice's legacy. Rabbi Rice's legacy, I think, is about the challenges of the rabbinate. I want to say it's more than that. I want to say, sure, the idea of trying to till the soil of America and create a rabbinic culture, and he certainly did that. The very first rabbi anybody respected in the United States was Rabbi Abraham Rice. So I want to end with that optimism. And maybe I will after I offer this caveat, which is Rabbi Rice really faced the challenges of the American rabbinate. And it's an important reminder. You'll have this with Rabbi Jacob Joseph, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, is that the rabbinate didn't necessarily kill him. The people did. It was very, very tough. Not to change the minds of his opponents in reform, but actually the people who he preached to in the pews. That was the challenge, I think. That being said, we'll be optimists and say, no, the legacy really is the idea that Kavod Torah can manifest itself in the United States, and Rabbi Rice was the first one to demonstrate that.
Absolutely, and you can still go visit his kever in Baltimore. And to mention, though, I don't think we did, the sad demise of his shul and what happened to the congregation.
Yeah, in due time. And that's par for the course. Many of these early congregations moved towards reform.
Yeah, which is just sad to think about. But like you said, that was par for the course of what happened.
I think America. Right now, David Einhorn's synagogue in Baltimore is now in Beis Yaakov. So.
Really? That's ironic.
The building.
He was the radical.
It was no longer his. It was
yeah.
But the building eventually does become that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I'll try to find a link to Sharfin's book. But if anyone wants to read, there's a lot more in Sharfin. Like I said, it's over the top. There's too much stuff in there, but it is wonderful. It's a very easy read, and he has a lot of interesting material in there. you can find it used still, like out of like $30, available like on Amazon. You can find it. It's not like in print, but I'll try to find you a link in the show notes to put a link to it. Is that like is there anything else to really read on rice?
One, yeah, I mean, my book on Who Rules the Synagogue has material on rice.
Your book's like $150.
Yeah, what can you do? I don't make a penny.
Sorry, I'm waiting for the paperback, Zev.
I'm trying. Rabbi, the first rabbi, I think is an excellent. There's also there was an article by a fellow named Tabak, a rabbi in Baltimore, who wrote an article in Tradition, a short article. Maybe in the notes we'll find the citation.
Okay, I will try to find that. Well, thank you, Zev, for joining me once again in another episode about the early American rabbinate. Definitely, there's many interesting figures and somewhat forgotten, somewhat known, and a lot more to talk about for sure. And so, but just even this little snippet to talk a little bit about Rabbi Rice. Thank you.